Thanks for tuning in to the PrimateCast. In just a moment, you'll hear an interview with distinguished primatologist Dr. Charles Snowdon on what music means to monkeys.
Evolution,
communication,
cognition,
conservation,
behavior,
primatology,
typically primates. Become the monkey.
Hello again, welcome back to the PrimateCast. I'm your host, Andrew McIntosh from Kyoto University's Wildlife Research Center. This episode features distinguished primatologist Dr. Charles Snowdon, or Chuck Snowdon as maybe he's better known by. Chuck is Hilldale Professor of Psychology Emeritus at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he's widely known for his work on primate social development, communication, and cognition. He ran the Snowdon Primate Center in the Department of Psychology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where so much was learned about small neotropical primates known as marmosets and tamarins. In the interview, we narrow down on one specific topic that Chuck has worked on over the past couple of decades, and that's musicality in non-humans. Now, the interview was actually recorded on April 10th, 2018, when Chuck visited us at the Primate Research Institute and presented his work in our Ecology and Behavior seminar. So it has been a while, but it was a really fun conversation then, and it remains one today. So it's a real pleasure to be able to share that with all of you finally. The interview was also done with our very own Mike Huffman in the studio, so he goes way back with Chuck and pops up from time to time during the conversation. In the interview, we talk about how music invokes emotion in our lives, with probably a little bit of oversharing by yours truly, and how he teamed up with cellist and composer David Tye to look into how other primates like tamarins respond emotionally and behaviorally to music. On the surface, that might sound a little odd, but it's interesting to note that a lot of animal caregivers actually play music or other sounds as a form of auditory enrichment for animals in their care. And Chuck even mentioned that this is pretty common for pet owners as well. And I should take an extra note here that David Tye went on to create some music for cats, but we're going to leave that for another story. There's also something known as the Mozart effect, where playing Mozart to studying kids or even listening ourselves when doing memorization tasks is supposed to somehow enhance skill development or memory retention. Chuck notes that the earlier studies of that were flawed and how important it is to actually understand not only whole pieces of music, but also how its components, some of which would be shared across different genres, affect us in different ways. So on that, finding out using the scientific method what music animals actually like listening to probably has a lot of value. But even more than that, Chuck and his colleagues began creating music for the tamarins themselves, which he discusses as well in this interview. And we even do play a bit of it during the interview and get his commentary. So if you've ever wondered what music for monkeys might sound like, you come to the right place. It's also funny that in an article published in The Guardian in 2009, after this important study was published, Chuck is quoted as saying, "Why should a tamarin find our music comforting? I find the monkey music quite irritating." And I think that's just a brilliant quote that leads to a lot of important questions. And it's also quite fascinating to think about why it is that we love music so much and how that love of music might have evolved over the years and what parts or components of it could be shared with other species as well. So I really think you're going to enjoy this discussion. And on that note, here is my interview with Dr. Chuck Snowdon. So as scientists, we often, we might not, but in the general population, people kind of separate the arts and science. Mm-hmm. Science is quite deliberately, and one doesn't necessarily funnel into the other. But here you come and you start tackling a topic such as music, mm-hmm. And I guess trying to inject ideas from both perspectives. So maybe you could start by just telling us, like, what is music from your perspective here, and how does that?
I guess at the most basic level, music is a series of notes that are put together that have some sort of meaning to somebody. I'm trying to be as general as possible in terms mm-hmm. of defining music. What I think we think of music is much more specific as human beings. We think of music in terms of specific genres. So someone might enjoy classical music. Someone else might enjoy bluegrass. Someone else might enjoy heavy metal. But in all the cases, there is some instrument involved. It could be a voice. It could be an oboe. It could be a bass guitar. But there's a series of notes that are produced, and those notes have some value. And part of what the scientific approach to music is saying is, what is that value? Can we determine that there's a real value to these strings of notes that are produced? And why do people do them? And what is the effect of these strings of notes that people produce? And does it have an effect? And then my other interest as a biological scientist is what's the phylogenetic history of a phenomenon. And so I think music is a really interesting thing to think about phylogenetically. Where does it come from? Is it uniquely human? We know from all the other studies, many of which are done here in Inuyama, that chimpanzees are capable of some amazing cognitive feats and tool creation feats that we never dreamed non-humans would be capable of doing. So should we think about artistic competence in much the same way? Instead of cognitive competence, is there an artistic competence that we can find existing in other species? So that's what my goal has been in this type of work.
Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, the study of music is maybe not something for you historically, or that started early on, maybe in your scientific career. So can you just tell us maybe how that came about and how you got involved in the study of music?
I actually went to a university that had a music conservatory, and so some of my close friends were musicians, and I became interested in music through them and a variety of different genres. I did music myself as a singer in a big chorus. So I've done music. I enjoy listening to music now. It's a really important part of our lives to listen to music and support live music when I can. So music has been important to me. So when this guy, David Tye, wrote me out of the blue saying, I have these ideas about the emotional effects of music, I was really intrigued. And so when he said, I'd like to test them on your monkeys, I said, I guess I was intellectually and emotionally prepared to accept this invitation and start a collaboration with him. It sounded really intriguing.
Can you give a bit of background on how he came to that idea to contacting you?
He's been thinking. He's a cellist for the National Symphony Orchestra in Washington, D.C. in the United States, and he's also a composer. He's written a couple of cello concerto, and he just, along the lines of thinking about music in general, was puzzled himself about how does music affect people emotionally and why does it affect people emotionally. And he started doing some reading and thinking on his own and came up with some basic principles. For example, we know that quick, rapid notes tend to be arousing. We know that long, slow notes tend to be calming and relaxing. We know that rock music has a lot of dissonance in it, and people hypothesize that we're creating states of fear and threat just for stimulating ourselves. Calming music tends to be harmonic. We don't want to play rock music. You don't want to play rock music to your baby to put it to sleep at night. So we use music in very different ways, and we use it to regulate our own emotional state. So if I'm sleepy and I have to write a paper, I might put on some Mozart or something quick and perky to keep me awake and functioning. If I'm wanting to go to sleep, I might want to put on something that's very different. So we all use music in our daily lives as a way to manipulate ourselves and manipulate our own emotional states. And so what are those features? What is it that we're looking for? And how does a composer create music in a way that has this emotional effect on us? So those were the questions he was interested in. And then
I see.
He was thinking and he thought he had some answers.
Okay. So before getting into that, just to take a bit of a tangent here, you mentioned that you sometimes listen to specific musics to put you in moods for certain things. Have you, as a primatologist, have you talked to other primatologists to see if there are any variation in that, just as a kind of anecdotal thing?
I haven't actually, so I don't really know. Mike?
I was going to bring Mike into the conversation.
Do you listen to music to manipulate your moods?
Sometimes I do. And what I'll often do if I'm doing something like entering data where I don't really have to think so much. It's just a manual process. Then I'll listen to something that doesn't have a language that I'm familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I hear music and it's singing, if it's something that in a language that I understand, then I get distracted and I can't do something else at the same time.
I would agree. I can't listen to vocal music and try to work. It has to be instrumental music.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So vocal music is very distracting because I'm paying attention to the words. And I have a friend who's a composer, not the one I collaborated with, but another colleague at my university who's a composer, who says he finds he can only listen to half of a concert because for him the act of listening as a musician and composer is so intense,
right? Okay.
that he can't listen for more than about 20 minutes at a time before he gets completely exhausted. And so I think we all listen in different ways, and he would be appalled to find out that I'm trying to work while I'm listening to music, and he might be composing for me because that would be sacrilege from his perspective.
Right.
So, Andrew, do you use music when you're in your life?
A lot. I don't know how much I want to get into it.
Before he came to primatology, he was a rock star.
Yeah, right. A budding or a non-budding. I guess the reason I'm a primatologist is it didn't bud as much as it. No. But music has always been a really important part of my life, and interest. Well, I don't know if it's interesting to anyone else but me. Is that in terms of affecting emotional states? When I first started dating my wife. Now, I had a recurring theme for gifts every once in a while, which was my own kind of musical soundtrack, starting from when I was in elementary school. So I would put together these years worth of soundtracks, just from recollection. But I remember the process of that was so powerful. You know, music has such an influence on us at different stages of our lives. And I think she kind of got a kick out of it and helped. Maybe I like to believe it. It helped us connect a little bit based on that, to give her a different perspective of my life before meeting her. So,
do the two of you share similar interest in music?
We have some overlaps, but we come from very different places.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking when you gave your talk today, and how that music has the bonding effect. Often you hear, they're playing our song.
Exactly.
That's what gets two people together, is something bonding.
Exactly.
Where you hear the music. And
And I would think that someone who loves hard rock is not going to be compatible with someone who likes Debussy or Bach. And I think those two people would be likely incompatible with one another.
Right,
So I think some shared common interest in music may play a really important role in pair bonding.
And also tolerance, because I'm pretty sure my wife just simply tolerated my band's music while we started dating. She turned up to a lot of our shows, but I don't think it was for the the aesthetic, the cheesecake factor of the music.
And not for the mate choice factor either.
Well, there might have been something there. So
okay, we won't pursue that.
Yeah, right. But so one of the things you talked about, and we all hear about often in the media, is that this idea of playing music for animals in a kind of enrichment or welfare perspective, or just in changing emotional states, and it's often Mozart that comes up. So what is the kind of validity of this, or what kind of did you guys do differently to kind of ask these questions?
It's a really good question, and I've been puzzled by why everybody picks Mozart. There's something universal that everyone thinks Mozart is somehow the ideal composer for animals to want to listen to, and it's just it's strange. I think part of it dates back to a series of flawed studies on the Mozart effect, where people thought if you play Mozart to your kids, they'll become smarter. And the data analyses are completely flawed in those studies, and they've been discredited. But there's still in the popular imagination the idea that Mozart is somehow good for you. I think people just haven't thought seriously or deeply enough about music and about what music can do to affect ourselves, let alone other species. We really haven't thought carefully enough about why we're playing music to animals and what the purpose is. So I'm really trying to be an evangelist to say we need to be really much more cognizant of what music is about, and that it's not just a simple, even a genre like heavy rock still can have some melodic components to it and can have some very harmonic aspects to it. To treat all music or one genre of music as uniform is just incorrect. And then to think that animals, no one is really asking the question I think about how do we want animals to change as a result of playing music for them? Do we want them to be happier? Do we want them to be more active? Do we want them to be more aggressive? Do we want them to be more fearful? All those are things that we can manipulate with the right type of music. But if we don't think about those questions ahead of time, then the type of music we play for them may be very bad for them. It may do them more harm than good, or may have unintended consequences that we're not aware of.
So how did you guys, so you're working in your studies with a colony of tamarins at the Wisconsin Madison Primate Center, correct?
No, it was at the Snowdon Primate Center in the Department of Psychology. I had a separate colony of animals.
Perfect. Thank you for correcting me. So you had the cotton top tamarins there. And so how did you approach this study? What were you kind of interested in going in, and why that species?
So part of what we did was David had to become familiar with, my collaborator David Ty had to become familiar with the vocalizations that the tamarins were producing. And so I would send him some sound files, and he would, and I wouldn't label them, and he would tell me what he thought the context would be based on his theories. And he was correct a lot of the time. So it meant that his theoretical ideas were predictive of what the function or the context of a particular call was. And he came and visited and made a lot of his own recordings of the monkeys over the course of several days. So he would have a good appreciation of their vocal repertoire and what their range of vocalizations would be. And then he went home and then taking his principles, which have to do with things like rapid, short, staccato-like notes, or long legato notes, harmony versus dissonance, noise versus not noise, those sorts of things, would put those together and create the different types of music that he produced. So he listened to the calls. We wanted to avoid mimicking tamarin calls because it would be a no-brainer to say, oh, we play a monkey vocalization back to it and it behaves this way. Well, people have done that for ages now. What we really want to do is to say, here's something totally unusual, something novel they've not heard before, but has some of the principles of their own natural vocalization, and principles that we think are music universals. And then we could show that if they responded the way we predicted, that those universals actually are working in a completely novel piece of sound that they've never heard before.
Okay, so just for the listeners here, do you mind if I play one of these pieces? Just give us we'll do it for a couple of seconds, and then I'll put the longer version on later. But. So can you maybe just run us through that really quickly? Like what is happening in this piece? So
that's actually a piece of calming music. It may not sound like that to us. In fact, it's a very fast tempo because the animal, we actually hypothesize that a resting heart rate is a good calm tempo. So if my resting heart rate is about 60 beats per minute, which is a typical adagio time signature for music, it's a relatively calm, slow piece. From the tamarin's perspective, this is a calm piece of music, even though the tempo you heard in the background is about 200 beats per minute. So you're getting a very rapid tempo from our perspective, but it's a very calming tempo from the monkey's perspective. The pitch range that you heard a lot of relatively long notes. Given that rapid tempo, they may sound short to us, but they're long relative to tamarin vocalizations. And they were high pitched because the tamarin voice range is 3 to 4 octaves higher than ours. So their calls are in the range of 6 to 8 kilohertz. And so you're hearing sounds that were very high pitched from our perspective, but in the normal voice range for the tamarin.
And so when you were playing these pieces back to the tamarins in your experimental setup, what kind of things did you see as a result?
So we would take a 5-minute bass line just to make sure that the animals were relaxed and calm before we did anything. Then we'd play a 30-second piece of music like the piece we just played. And then we'd monitor their behavior for the 5 minutes following the termination of the music. And so at the end of that, we're then watching them for 5 minutes. And what we discovered is that they would be much more agitated in terms of locomotor behavior, move a lot more after they heard the equivalent of tamarin rock music compared to tamarin serenade, which is what we just played. They would also show more anxiety-related behavior after the rapid rock music, the dissonant music. And they also showed more social cohesion with each other, we think, because they were somewhat distressed, and so they were seeking each other out for comfort compared to what they would do after the other piece. And these are the same monkeys being played both pieces, so that we're comparing the same animal in condition A and condition B and looking at their behavior there.
And so what kind of, so I think you mentioned, and it's maybe practiced quite often in different primate housed settings, that people will play either music or put on the radio or things like that as a form of enrichment, or having white noise, or even habituating the animals to the sounds of human voices. I heard is why they do it at PRI, actually, which is why they use the radio. But so what kind of, ultimate applications or things do you see this going towards?
So one of the things that listeners can ask themselves, did you enjoy listening to that little bit of music? If you didn't, then think about what would happen if you were a monkey and someone played music that you didn't like and they played it all day long. So I think a first fundamental question we need to ask is, do animals actually like the music? Is it neutral? Is it beneficial? Is it harmful? And that would be a first principle that every animal care facility and every pet owner should be aware of, because we've also discovered pet owners also play music for their animals and their own preferred music, in the idea that their pets will like the same music they do.
Right.
So I think we all need to ask ourselves a very deep question about, are we doing something positive? Are we doing something negative? Is it having no effect whatsoever? If it's having no effect, then I might as well save electricity and energy and do something else with that power. If it's negative, I should know about that early on. I should not just make the assumption that playing music is going to be beneficial to the animals. And I think that's a mistake. It's an assumption that everyone makes, virtually everyone makes. I hope not to, but virtually everyone else is making. And I think we need to kind of counter that assumption, have people be much more concerned about what they are playing and why they're playing it.
This sounds like, so I know from the tamarin stuff, you also moved and did a little bit of research with cats. So this is a much more closer to what the average person would be maybe involved with, having cats as pets and things. And cats are all over social media and everything, so kind of a craze. But so what was going on in that aspect?
So part of what stimulated that was that first of all, we were interviewed by many people by many reporters after we did the tamarin music paper, and almost everyone volunteered something to the effect of, I play this for my pet, and that's why. And so the guy from the classical music station said, well, I know my dog really likes to listen to classical music, so that's what I put on all day. And a guy from a rock station said, oh, I know my dog really likes to listen to heavy metal. And so everyone was. It turned out, as we were being interviewed, that our interviewers were in fact using music for their pets, and hadn't thought about what the effects might be, but they were sure that their pets, whatever they were, liked the music they did. So that was one of the stimuli. Second stimulus was that we wanted to come up with something that would be more relevant, and in David's case, perhaps more marketable.
Yeah.
And
I was wondering if you could download these on iTunes.
So we went to the cats, in part because cats are more homogeneous in size and voice than all the different breeds of dogs might be. So we chose cats as a starting point. And David composed a few pieces of music that we tested on cats. And then he's subsequently gone on to make a recording. And I'm a neutral scientist, so I have no financial stake in this. So I'm not going to say much more than that he did do a Kickstarter campaign to get money. His goal was $10,000 to raise money to do a recording of cat music that he could distribute to others. Ended up in a month getting $250,000 through Kickstarter. So it just says how many cat fanciers there are out in the world and who want to have some music for their cats.
We need that kind of support for the tamarins and other primates.
I know. It was just stunning how many cat lovers there were and how much they're willing to support him in this idea. One of the possible benefits that I've discovered in emails from people that have just and conversations with people is that it may not work for all cats, may not be beneficial for every cat, but we found several people have told us that their shelter cat or their feral cat that they have adopted has become much more interactive with them once they started playing the cat music. And so several people described, my cat hasn't touched us at all. Takes our food and drinks our water, but that's all she does. But once I started playing this music, she jumped into our lap or rubbed her face against my leg for the first time. So it may have something of therapeutic value, may not be necessary for a normal cat in a normal household with a good family condition and a good rearing history. But for cats that have had a bad rearing history, this may be something very beneficial for them.
Go ahead, Mike.
Sounds like the cat's meow.
It does.
Along with pets, I'm sure many people have seen on YouTube when you play music to one of these white parrots, and they rock to the music, the cockatoo. What's your take on that? How is that? Is that beneficial, or is it just?
I think it's what that study does. There's a famous several YouTube videos of a cockatoo named Snowball. So you can Google Snowball. Snowball is interesting because she or he is able to track the tempo of music. So he's dancing to the tempo of the music. It's not that music is beneficial to him, although it's getting him a lot of exercise, but what he's able to do is track the beat. Yeah. And something that people have not been able to show in mammalian species to date, except for one sea lion, is that mammals are able to track the beat and follow the beat. So there may be something fundamentally different between the ability to track the beat of a music versus the emotional aspects of signals, which is what I've been working with.
What do you think the evolutionary significance of tracking a beat for a bird could be?
People have hypothesized that this is an important thing for vocal learners to do, because part of what you have to learn is the tempo as well as the pitches. So when you're a vocal learner, you have to learn pitch and tempo. Now I don't buy that exactly, because I think there's a lot more involved, and I think monkeys are capable of some aspects of vocal learning that have been ignored till now. But to date, we only have one mammal example of a single sea lion that's able to track changes in tempo. It's not just keeping to a beat. But if I change the beat, can you keep up? Can I track the tempo change? And that's what birds are able to do, and one sea lion is able to do. And we don't have any other examples from mammals to this date.
So just before I close here, just a couple of things I wanted to follow. One, which is interesting to me, is going back to the original question, not quite original, but I posed earlier about why people pick Mozart to play for animals. In your studies, you've used a range of different kinds of music to compare with the music that you've created as well, and to see the responses. And I noticed some of them were, so for the kind of heavier music, you had Metallica, you have Tool, you have Nine Inch Nails, and I kind of wonder, whose input is that, or where does the decision happen of which kinds of music to play?
Well, that was something David and I talked about a lot, and I had to educate myself a lot more about music than I had been before. He had to educate himself a lot about experimental design. There's been a mutual trade-off there. But one of the things we were trying to find was music that would have, if we're trying to write calming music, what would be calming music for humans? And so Barbara's Adagio for Strings is a famous one that has all the components that David predicted would be important in a series of long notes that are harmonically related to each other, descend in frequency over time. Nine Inch Nails was actually a piece of a piano solo that had some of the same components to it, even though it's by ostensibly a rock group. It actually was a piece of music that, just to say it wasn't just classical versus rock, we wanted to have a rock music piece. It also had some of the long, slow legato notes that descended in frequency. So we're trying to come up with the same things that we felt were really important in human music. And then we used the rock music clearly as something that people would dance to and get aroused to, and try to use that for the tamarins as a control.
So on a more personal side, I'm just kind of curious, in having done these studies over a number of years, and then not coming out of kind of a music environment or a music background to doing it, What do you kind of think is the most important thing you've learned about music from these studies? Or anything that stands out for you that you've connected to or have been surprised by?
To connect back to something you brought up at the very beginning, we talk about STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And I think we should be talking about STEAM fields instead. Science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And I think there's a very close relationship. So I think one of the things that's come out of this is a collaboration that I never would have been involved with before, that I really have learned a lot from. So it's taught me a lot to collaborate with someone who's a musician and to think about how music might be important in the lives not only of ourselves, but in terms of other species and where it might have come from. So it's been very educational, and I like this idea of STEAM disciplines now, and we should be talking about not STEM, but STEAM, and building up STEAM with more connection between arts and science.
And Mike, maybe just one for you. At the beginning of the talk that Dr. Snowdon just gave, you had a very melodious introduction full of embarrassment and riches of compliments. Really? And so you guys have known each other for quite some time. Right. And I just wonder if music has ever interfaced over these years. Do you guys share any kind of that you can think of?
Not through music until today. Maybe next time we meet, we'll exchange iTunes from our iPod.
But you have to look a bit at monkeys making music in a way
with stone handling. They're very strong attraction to making noise. Yeah. Whether they rub a stone on a metal rooftop or on a bumpy gradient or against other stones or stone on metal, it seems to be something very attractive to them. So.
That's something a 2 to 4 year old toddler would also enjoy doing, rubbing. I mean, I still enjoy rubbing a stick across a fence and listening to the sound of the bass.
Yeah.
As the father of a 2-year-old, I know very well the range of sounds they like to produce, directly and indirectly. So,
thank you, Andrew, for inviting me to participate in this. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining the PrimateCast. Thanks for listening to the PrimateCast. The podcast is hosted and produced by me, Dr. Andrew McIntosh, Senior Scientist for Wildlife Conservation at the Wilder Institute, Calgary Zoo, formerly Associate Professor of Biological Sciences at Kyoto University. Join me for new episodes as often as I can get them out on whatever podcast platform you prefer. Leave a rating or a review of the show to help other listeners find it. Connect with me through our website, theprimatecast.info, or social media on X, Facebook, or Instagram. Feel free to comment, ask questions, suggest future guests, or share whatever else might be on your mind. If you value the show, consider donating or becoming a member. You can do so by visiting theprimatecast.info and clicking on the big yellow Buy Me a Mic button, which takes you to our campaign page. Or you could click on that little heart icon next to the social media links in your podcast player, or on the text link in the show notes. Your support will help cover production costs and is essential to ensure that I can continue to produce quality informational and inspirational interviews with leading figures in the field long into the future.